our foreign relations, our justice system, our governance, our international competitiveness, our education, our world-class festivals and entertainment, sports, politics, regional cooperation, and much more. Globally positioning Dominica within the Caribbean. Join the conversation on the Global View on Q. Tune in, call us, have your say. The Global View on Q, only on Q95, the big station.
Very pleasant good evening to you at home or in your vehicle if you are on the road or at work or listening on the radio or on the internet. Thank you for choosing Q95. This is the Global View on Q. A very warm welcome to all of our Q family listeners at home and globally. It is Tuesday, the 26th day of May, 2026, the 20th Tuesday of 2026, and it's just about 8:03 p.m. in the studios of Q95, the big station. We're live on our radio frequencies and on QTV. Please follow us on Facebook and on YouTube at Q95 FM Radio. Share the live, like our pages. Our on-air phone numbers are on the homepage of our website at www.q95da.com. Get the latest breaking news and reviews on Q95 because you know it's true if you hear it on Q. We continue to revive the spirit of graciousness, love, peace, prosperity, and unity among our Kalinago and Afro-Caribbean brothers and sisters. This is our 14th Global View on Q show for 2026, and we continue to engage with our local, regional, and global Q family listeners and friends of Dominica. I'm Sheridan Gregoire, Mr. G. With me tonight is my co-host, Justice Dr. Irving Andre, former Dominica UN Ambassador Crispin Gregoire, and Mr. Claudia Sanford. Good evening to all you very gentle people. This show tonight has two segments. First, we will comment on the recent fires in Roseau, and thereafter, we will explore in a three-part series how have the Kalinago people of Dominica fared since the event dubbed the last Carib War in 1930. So we will start that tonight in the second segment, and then we'll continue into a series of two other shows on that subject because I think it has a tremendous proportion and it's very important to Dominica. So we will deal with this particular issue, the Carib territory, in a three-part series. So here are some talking points on the recent fires in Roseau. Are the fires in Roseau a coincidence? Why this bit of mysterious fires in Roseau? Is there any link between these fires? Who stands to altogether to benefit from these fires or to be blamed for setting these fires? Do they remind us of the burning of the Richtag? Are they related to arson that led to charges of years ago? Who stands to gain from torching Roseau? Now, I would give you, when I come back, I would give you some talking points on the second segment when we get to it. But for now, we will just deal with the talking points on the Roseau fire. So we look forward to the contributions of Justice Dr. Irving Andre, former Dominica UN Ambassador Crispin Gregoire, and Mr. Claudia Sanford on the recent fires in Roseau, and on how have the Kalinago people of Dominica fared since the last war in 1930. So as usual, we invite you, our Q family and friends of Dominica, to help us give our usual huge shout out and a big thank you to our farmers, our healthcare providers, our frontline workers, police and fire officers, teachers, doctors, our nurses, and public and private sector patriots and friends of Dominica at home and abroad. We welcome each and every one, each and every Dominican and friend of Dominica to the Global View on Q. We embrace you wherever you are, in every nook and cranny, in every village, in every community at home in Dominica, in the region and globally. As usual, thank you, Sherwin, for keeping us on the air, and thanks a lot, Lambi, on the console directing the traffic. We will take your calls. As you know, the people's voice is always a priority on the Global View on Q. So I go now to Justice Dr. Irving Andre for his first comments on the recent fires in Roseau. Dr. Andre?
Well, let me say good evening to the fellow panelists, Lambi, Sherwin, you, Mr. G, the listeners, and good evening to all and sundry. These fires are obviously of concern. You'd have to be extremely naive or gullible to believe that they were just coincidental. The context in which the fires took place included, for example, recent discussions by the political directorate about enhancing Roseau, whatever that means, because the whole talk or the narrative of enhancing Roseau has been something that we've heard year in, year out for at least the past 5-6 years. Nothing has been done. So it's rather passing strange that you would have three separate fires. You can say they were all independent fires. You could say that they were the hand of the devil playing tricks with Dominica or punishing Dominica for some ill conduct and so on. But there is method in the madness of these fires. You made reference to the fire which burnt down the German parliament in 1933. Now, our good friend Blessings always referred to that fire, and he's absolutely correct, because the significance of that fire was the Nazis under, he needs no introduction, Adolf Hitler. They contrived to burn down the German parliament as a pretext to wage a war of extermination against their opponents, the communists. And the question is, to what extent is there any significance between these fires and a diabolical plot to give those with deep pockets an opportunity to scoop up property and continue to destroy the very heart and soul of Roseau by building these soulless buildings all over? Who can afford to do that these days? Which foreigner or foreigners? Which deep pocket sycophants can afford to take advantage of these opportunities created by a use, or the use, indiscriminate use, or should I say criminal use, of a fire? And there are a few disturbing aspects of these fires, because I heard of a Q, a fireman, a fire officer, I should say, with tremendous number of years of experience, now retired. He was very scathing in his criticism of the way these fires were put out, quite frankly. He was very scathing about the incompetence which he experienced or which he saw. But not only that, the political directorate actually rewarded some of these folk by giving them $1,000 each to do their duties, which according to the professional accounts, was below standard. But what is even more shocking, at least in one of the fires, you had a Haitian national saying that he overheard a police officer, for God's sakes, telling a fire person not to attack one part of that fire which consumed the offices of a well-known lawyer and politician. That is criminal, to say the least. And guess what? The fire officer complied meekly with that directive from a police officer. In other words, a blatant and egregious dereliction of his duty, which obviously resulted in the destruction of the facilities or the office facilities of that individual. This should not be happening. This should not be happening in a place where, quite frankly, the rule of law is supposed to prevail. But this is nothing shocking, because, quite frankly, the whole question of law and order, the enforcement of law and order, has been very selective, it has been very discriminatory, and it has been very destructive in its wake. So the question has to be asked: are these just random acts of destruction by fire, or is this a coordinated attempt to provide opportunities for certain persons who can take advantage of those opportunities to scoop up properties in Roseau and to nest or to feather their financial nests? And this is not just sound and fury signifying nothing. The evidence is there. Mysterious buildings being purchased by persons who cannot account for that wealth, at least not by the legitimate means of earning an income. So this is the state of affairs that now exist today, that by any means necessary, certain persons are enriching themselves at the expense of hardworking Dominicans. And the question is, where do we go from there? And I'll end with that preliminary comment. Thank you.
Yes, thanks a lot for this very revealing remarks, Dr. Andre. Claudius, will you have any comments on the recent fires in Roseau yourself? You need to unmute your mic. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Dr. Andre did a good job at speaking to those fires. way up in the Kalinago territory. We get secondhand information when these things happen, but then the patterns are very telling. It's not coincident that the frequency of these fires are not coincidental, and we have seen quite clearly the caliber of people who are purchasing up most of the properties around Roseau. And from what I'm gathering, that there are not many more left to buy. So they're up in the countryside, in the Marigot area, Hatton Garden area, scooping up properties. But it's a very disturbing trend. And if we have people in high offices are turning to those strategies to be able to gain assets, I think is a very disturbing and frightening trend in Dominica. As to the evidence, I think there are enough evidence, circumstantial and also hard evidence, that people can draw conclusions on. But at the end of the day, I believe Dominicans need to wake up from their slumber and realize what is happening to our beautiful country. And that is what I'll say at this point.
All right, thanks a lot, Claudius. Crispin, any thoughts on this recent fires in Roseau?
Yes, good evening, Mr. G. Good evening to Irvin and Claudius Sanford, and the production side, Lambi and Sherwin. And good evening to your many listeners across the globe. Mr. G, I'm not an expert like Dr. Andre on fires. He's written a whole book on a fire in 1963, I believe, in the Carnival. And so he knows a lot about fire issues. I am a layman, and all I can say is that it concerns me that the old quarter of the city is being burned. That is the part of the city we really need to preserve. There has been some destruction to that old quarter of the city, what I call the historic colonial aspect of the city, and we need to preserve that for future generations. So we've been callous about that. We've been destroying some of these buildings ourselves, but speaking specifically about the fires, what it worries me that a whole block, when I happened to be in Dominica just, I think after the fire down by the old market, where Jolly's pharmacy was located, and one of its locations, and I saw it for myself. And a whole block is burnt, and now another whole block is burnt. People say the first fire was accidental. We don't really know. I'd love to see where the investigations lead. This last fire, I understand that somebody was arrested and being questioned. The question is was that person doing dirty work for people? I don't know. Being in the diaspora, I'm not privy to the grains of gossip that may be true that circulates Roseau when such things happen, right? Mr. G, what concerns me is the capacity of the fire service to handle such fires. I know they don't have the capacity, and I only hope that this will serve for government to acquire the resources for the fire service to be able to be more prepared, more effective in fighting fires, and that's all I can say at this juncture.
All right, thanks a lot, Crispin. Dr. Andre, you mentioned, I think, Crispin mentioned that you wrote a book on fires. And a couple of things I want you to add, but the young people who are listening probably are not familiar with these fires at all that you wrote on. And then if you could elaborate a little bit and make the connection between the Rich Stag and what is going on here, I would appreciate that.
Well, let me just a brief note on the 1963 Carnival fire. You know that there was this infamous fire which took the lives of at least 3, probably more, and injured very seriously at least 11 or 12 Dominicans. And we did some digging, let's put it this way. We interviewed persons who were involved, who suffered, who were injured. We looked through all newspaper accounts. We looked through the official inquiry into the fire. And we look at the witness, at the evidence called. Some of the evidence was quite frankly, quite shocking. For example, there was a well-known police inspector who was known to be a lover of alcohol. He was quite near to the fire. He didn't respond. And then he testified that he was in that bar drinking cokes. And the commissioner accepted much of that evidence. But despite the fact that he accepted much of that evidence, the conclusion of the Commission of Inquiry was the fire was by design. That is the euphemism he employed to describe the genesis of the fire, by design. He didn't say it was deliberately set. And you know why? Because we're talking about colonial Dominica at the time. And we'll have occasion to speak about it when you deal with the whole Kalinago question. Because those who were suspected of being involved in some way or the other were persons of privilege. And we'll talk about that when we speak about the Kalinago territory. You see, there is a British tradition of history. It's called the Whig tradition, W-H-I-G. And that tradition stands for this. You look at the past and you look at the present, and you say that there is an inexorable match to improvement over the times, over the years, in terms of society, in terms of development. So we look at the fire, we saw what happened. Nobody was prosecuted, really. Many people refused to participate in carnival after that fire. And we look at today and we ask ourselves, where is the progress? Where is the progress heralded by independence in 1978? How have things improved? In what way, in what shape, in what form? Because today, manifested in Dominica, we see the same traits and trends. We see, as I said, the selective enforcement of justice, if you want to call it that way. We see, for example, how certain persons can get away with certain things. We see, for example, the neglect of the environment. And neglect is a polite word. I know debauch is not on the agenda, but debauch is part of the tragedy of the Kalinago territory. Who suffers most? And who suffers most when you have these fires? These persons who perhaps don't lack insurance, persons who cannot afford to rebuild, persons who have to relocate to deal with the adverse effects of these fires. But we have to look at the fires within a broader context. Look at how we treat as a society or a government those historical artifacts that Crispin was talking about. What is the fate of the public library? What is the fate of the old Prime Minister's residence in the Morn? What is the fate of the Barracan building? I don't know. But we see this pattern of neglect. And some will say it is mischievous and deliberate neglect, because there's no excuse why, for example, the Roseau Library should be in the condition that it is. It is a shocking abdication of responsibility in terms of preserving Dominica's cultural and societal heritage. And again, that theme will be extended when you look at the whole Kalinago question. Where is the progress? You've had a number of, let me not talk about this. So we have to take this thing very seriously. Can we afford to destroy that which has inherent value in Dominica's society? Can we afford to continue that assault on persons who can ill afford? For what purpose? What about the Botanic Gardens? Mr. G, I heard you're helping to supervise a bowling alley, for God's sakes, in the Botanic, a bowling alley. And we're not even talking about cricket. Huh? Where is the link? Where is that organic link between the gardens and what it stands for, what it represents as part of the heart of the nature island and a bowling alley, Gaston? So what we have is a total negation, a total deviation for that which sustains us as a community. What are we going to have? We're going to build more homes for those who've lost their homes in the fire. You see, historically in the Caribbean, building a home or buying a home is the very epitome of making yourself, developing yourself, providing generational wealth for your children, for your family. Something you can be proud of. At least that's how it used to be. But what we have now is, again, a total abortion of that type of phenomenon. Because the homes you get, first of all, they're substandard. Secondly, you don't have title. And thirdly, the homes are a method of political, should I say, crucifixion? Manipulation. Because you can't dare say anything contrary to the political directorate because it's not your home. And we'll talk about that when we focus more exclusively on the Kalinago territory situation. So this fire is just a symptom of that overarching principle that everyone who does not, or everyone who does not toe the line must pay a price and must gravitate towards a condition of dependency. That is the problem.
Thank you, Dr. Andre. Claudia, after Dr. Andre now has elaborated on what he said at first, do you have any further comments? You need to unmute your mic.
Thank you again, Mr. G. The last part he mentioned about the control or the manipulation with the house is so true. And the Kalinago territory now is one of the targets of that. It's nicely masked under the scheme of poverty, but it's also a decapitation of the courage and the dignity of the Kalinago people. And I'm really hoping that as we get along with the following discussion, we can dig deep into that kind of manipulation.
Yes, certainly, and we certainly can. Crispin, you have any further thoughts before we move on to the no? Okay, so let us go into the second segment. So here are some talking points or questions, if you like, on how have the Kalinago people of Dominica fared since an event I believe is known by the Kalinago people as the last Carib War in 1930. So here the question, how have the Kalinago people fared since 1930? And I will just put 2 or 3 questions on the table for now, and then we'll deal with the rest later. As the Carib Act of 1978 helped to institutionalize the Kalinago chief and the Kalinago Council, since Dominica attained political independence in 1978, is this act still relevant after 48 years? What provisions of the Carib Act of 1978 need to be revised now? And then secondly, were the indigenous people of Dominica included in the negotiations for political independence? And how are Kalinago people viewed by the wider Dominican population? Is there a greater embrace of the Kalinago people and their cultural attributes by the wider Dominican population? I will just leave it at that for now. And Dr. Andre, I will invite your comments on the opening of that discussion on the Kalinago people.
Well, thank you, Mr. G. Let me just say as a preface that obviously I will defer to Mr. Sanford, who is quite eloquent and passionate about this topic for obvious reasons. Again, let us reflect on the history, not just of Dominica, but the Kalinago territory. You talked about the Kalinago War. Now, the British, if I recall correctly, based on some of your talking points, they abolished the Carib Council. They resuscitated it in the 1950s. The Kalinago folks were not involved in the discussions towards the achievement of political independence in 1978. Premier Leblanc in the 60s, if I recall correctly, as you've indicated in your notes, ended the isolation of the territory with road access to the Kalinago territory. There was a passage of the Carib Act in 1978 in the House of Assembly, giving them theoretically a greater stake in Dominica. Under Edison James, some 800 acres was added to the territory. You also have the flowering to some extent of the cultural history of the Kalinago territory. You have different groups, you have cultural expressions and so on. You have various Kalinago chiefs making a contribution. The Eugenia Charles Administration Act prevents the Carib Council from taking action to expel persons who do not meet legal requirements to reside in the territory. You have other developments. You have the inclusion or the joining of the Kalinago territory with other regional and international indigenous organizations. All this would seem to suggest that the Kalinago Council and Territory is on a road to achievement and cultural realization. But it is not. That is the problem. It is not. Why do I say that? Recent events have shown that the same attitude, the same patronizing attitude, the same attitude of treating the Kalinago territory as a mere appendage of Dominica, as a poor third cousin, exists in spades. Take, for example, the Debauche. Let me ask you this, and I'll stand to be corrected by Mr. Sanford. Which community will be most affected by the devastation and by the lust and hunger and obsession to obtain copper at Debauche? Which territory will be most affected by the desecration and the devastation? And what, digging a hole, how many? 100 feet, 200, 300? Which community will be most affected? The effects of that type of activity on the river, the effect of that type of activity with respect to the health of the people. It's the Kalinago territory. And listen to how these folk justify it. You need stones. You need stones for the airport. Nowhere else in Dominica, coincidentally, can you find these stones. What nonsense. What errant nonsense. But what is most egregious is that it is Dominicans doing it to Dominicans. Yes, we can blame MMMC or whatever the hell the name is, but who brought them here? We can talk about Gardigan, but who brought him here? Who is giving these companies these big fat contracts loaded with fat, or should I say kickbacks, while Dominican communities are being ignored in terms of the trucking industry, in terms of the professional industry, and so on? They, and Dominica by extension, is paying a price. But the Kalinago people, just as they were right at the forefront of the struggle during the colonial era, they were the foot soldiers of liberation. They are right now bearing the full brunt of that devastation. But it's not just that. What about the tropical storm? I heard Sanford on radio many times talking about the effects of that storm, the loosening of the soil. I heard him talk about the devastation to his home and to others, the slippage. Let me ask you this, because I don't know. I stand to be corrected by somebody. What help have they gotten? Tangible help, not token help, tangible help. I heard, or perhaps I didn't hear, perhaps I'm wrong, that our minister, our leaders, one of them or all of them, was going around the territory giving a little $50 bill, giving a $100 bill. But where is the 10 million from Hugo Chavez? What better time to produce it? I mean, you can give every company big tax concessions. You can boast that foreigners take out of Dominica over $200 million. What are you giving the people? Where is the marginal plan? Not marginal. Where is the Marshall Plan to assist the territory in its hour of need? $50. $100? What is being done to ensure that those who have their own homes can continue or can at least repair their homes? What hope are you given, as opposed to just reinforcing the dependency of the people on you to regard yourself as a father figure? I should ask Father Branca about what should have been the appropriate response at this time of need of the Kalinago people. Giving them a 10 cents when you're taking out $1? Giving them $50 when you're withholding $10 million? What are you doing? And we made reference to the homes, and Mr. Sanford knows much better than I. But virtually every time I visit Dominic, I drop into the territory, stop or two, and so on. Homes have been built. But let me ask Sanford, where are the certificates of ownership? Huh? Show me the certificates of ownership. They don't have it. So these homes are not the blessings that you would expect them to have. Not the gestures of empowerment, but it's basically curses of dependency. And that's the problem. And we're talking about the Kalinago territory. We're talking about empowerment. We're talking about giving them a sense of independence. Let me ask, and Claudius is a big economist. You know, I'm basically a fall cage contractor, so I really don't know too much about economics. Where is the Heritage Fund for the Kalinago territory? A fund separated to provide for the territory, not for persons you identify as supportive of you, but for the territory and the people as a whole. Where is the indigenous bank to lend on concessionary terms? Persons in the community, Laye. Not talking about Sasaye, Mr. G. I'm asking Laye. What about the sports establishment? Where is it? The Kalinago community disproportionately has produced a number of talented national cricketers. Where are the activities that would establish the community as a cricket or sporting hub with a mini stadium, with probably sports or coaching facilities to develop and to empower these young people? Where is that facility, Mapasa? What about courses on the Kalinago history in schools? Oh, I don't know. I remember studying ABC in primary school, quite frankly. I have to admit that. But what are Dominican children being taught in primary and secondary schools about the Kalinago territory? What efforts have been made to preserve the history by repatriating some of the documents that continue to languish in England about the territory? What encouragement is being given to young scholars from the Kalinago territory to excavate their history and to write a definitive work on the Kalinago territory? Now, there's books that have been written. Kalinago Blood, for example. What's his name? Dr. Honich just talked about some of that history. There have been a number of books written by writers, not only of Dominican vintage, but other islands like Antigua, Jamaica. Kincaid, for example, who has Dominican roots, who is out of Antigua. But what encouragement, what facilities, what resources have been brought to the table to enable the people to achieve or to enhance their sense of independence, their sense of belonging? What about a museum? Where is it? Showcasing the historical artifacts on the territory. Laye. No interest, nothing. I know that Mr. Sanford will tell me there is a Kalinago house, what's the name of it, the indigenous name, I can't remember, that has been built and so on. But what has happened beyond mere tokenism? And there are, again, to be fair, persons in the territory who've gone and who've succeeded spectacularly in academics, in law, in medicine and so on. But the cruel irony, let me remove my glasses. The cruel irony is this: because that has been revealed during the fight to save the soul of the Moors. Where are the government ministers of Kalinago vintage who have had the audacity to say that they will put the interests of their community over that of their pockets or their SUV, government owned, I should say? Where are they? Where is that sensitivity that would define and that would help to show that, in fact, there is, in fact, progress and development of the territory? Ipala, it's not there. There's much work to be done. And the future of the Kalinago territory rests in the hands of those committed, passionate, patriotic, progressive Kalinago territory folks. And I think we have one of them among us on the panel. Thank you very much.
Yes, we certainly have one of them among us, and you mentioned his name so many times, Dr. Andre, in your remarks there, that I have to call on Claudius Sanford now to give us his first comments on the discussion that we're having here tonight. I'll come to you in a moment, Crispin, because I know you have done a lot of work on this and you have a lot to contribute tonight. But let me go to Claudius Sanford first. Claudius, unmute your mic and go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. G again, and Dr. Andre. You raise a lot of very, very important questions. Questions that really have begs answers. But the discussion tonight, to start off with, I will preface my contribution in that pre-1930, the Europeans, in the initial engagement with the Kalinago people, never wanted us to survive. So if we take that as a premise of what is going on and what happened post-1930, you'll understand that the colonial masters on their arrival here, seek to eradicate us. It was our understanding of the environment and our pure courage and tenacity that have us, the remnants of us still in the Caribbean. So if you understand the intention of the Europeans, what we inherit is nothing that we should, look on with any sense or any iota of dignity or validation to the Europeans, right? They wanted us dead. So once we start on that, we understand post-1930, and I think Dr. Andre gave a very succinct description of the historical trends that our ceremonial tribal governance of the Kalinago chief and his wise men, in council, that was put on hold from 1930 until 1951, when Jemadua Francis took over as the chief after that long period of halt. Just because we tried to continue a tradition that had served our purpose, served us well, moving between islands and exchanging goods and services for survival. That was the premise on which the British came in and bombarded the eastern coast, an area they left us to die because of the rugged terrain. Right? So we survived that as well, and we were able to come back until 1978. But it's also sad to say that the liberated slaves, or the African liberated slaves, continued the tradition. They never really embraced and dignified the struggle of the Kalinago people, in a sense that they were even given any form of empowerment. Dr. Andre described us as a third cousin, and I don't know, if I can better that description, because even the freed slaves, when they took over the plantation, they didn't look back and say, "Hey, thank you to the Kalinago people for helping us at least attain the political and economic systems of the colonial masters and give us a little more land." So in other words, since 1903, from Hesketh Bell, no other government, which is the freed slaves, have awarded the Kalinago people, who rightly so deserve more of the land, any other land than Edison James in 1995 under the Derby government of 82 acres on the southern part of the territory. So that is historically clear and written. And no matter how well ChatGPT writes speeches for the current and the past governments, they have not materialized their words into action. It's all bell powell and no action whatsoever. And what has happened even now with the last disaster and the disaster before that, which is Debonche and Crapo Hall, put this into more serious perspective, because the limited land space we have, the 37,000 acres that was given by Hesketh Bell, is now under threat. And that last rainfall has really devastated it. As a matter of fact, less than 10% of the 37 acres is what the Kalinago people lived on. In other words, build their homes and their livable space. The other 10% is where they do their little farming on, and the majority of it are hills and valleys and the forest reserve, which we also depend on. So that 10% is now reduced to maybe 5% with the last events of April 26th, because we have no idea what's happening below there. We can assume stuff. We can make certain assumptions, which one of them is very solid in my mind, is all the blasting that the Chinese are doing in Crapo Hall that has caused some serious shaking and rattling of the lower bedded rocks, which is less than a mile away in a straight line, and has caused a lot of this water erosion and these slippages, which is making it totally unsafe for almost 50% of the population below the road to live on. So that is another major issue that has to be guided upon. And maybe now it begs, or it knocks at the conscience of our leaders and those who have used the Kalinago territory and the Kalinago people as political pawns, to really contemplate on what do we do going forward. Is it the time, is it the signal that we should allocate some more lands to the Kalinago people out of the reservation, which is truly belonging to them? Or should we replace them and immerse them into the majority of the Dominican population that is what Eugenia Chávez wanted to do? And the remnants of her leadership is still passing on Roosevelt Skerrit. Is that what the next move is going to be? And these are legitimate questions we ask at this time. But that said, the Kalinago people, the Kalinago people, we have weathered the storm from 1978 to current. Although we were not an integral part of the independence negotiations, we had a minute part to play. When I dig the history of the Kalinago territory, it's disgusting to tell, but it's worth telling, that the political parties at the time were playing the game of who could provide the most rum to drunk the leaders at the time to get them to sign on to the documents. That is the history that we are told from the local place. So one of the leaders took the chief to La Plaine and give him a nice lunch and a nice dinner and some rum for him not to sign. And then the other one took him and maybe give him a bigger dinner and more drinks and got him even more intoxicated and got him to sign. And, this is the kind of story that is passed on in the Kalinago context. Very, very disgusting, but, it's kind of true. That is how the Europeans saw us. That is how the freed African slaves who took over the plantation saw us. And our history has been written on that paper up to today. But I think it will change. And from 1978 to now, we have feared out well, and also we have fared out pretty badly. The Kalinago people have made strides in education, that is for sure. In 1978, when the Independence Declaration was signed, we had a few people who had been to high school. Very few were able to traverse to Roseau to go to the grammar school and get an education. I mean, you could count those numbers on one hand, and some of them were in the position of leadership at the time at that level. So the whole jargon of legal documentation and the Kalinago Act, we cannot blame them for not making a more meaningful contribution to that. We have to accept that those who represented us at that time saw it fit to put what is now currently in the Act, and we could do no better. So that is 1978. So we are in 2026, and that question has to be re-examined, and the contribution to the Kalinago Act has to be reviewed, and it has to be modified. There's no doubt about it. The commitment of the current government or future government will be tested when the time is right for those modifications to be made. And I, for one, once there's life and there's strength and there's blood flowing through my veins, will keep fighting for that review and that modification of the Kalinago Act to the last breath. So that I can say tonight, very boldly. The Kalinago people has made tremendous strides in sports, and Brother Andre did make reference to that when he asked where are the playing fields, where is the mini stadium, to highlight and develop even more of those talents which exist in the Kalinago territory. And currently, if you listen to the sports news on cricket, the Kalinago Warriors are dominating the cricket arena in Dominica, and has been so for many years. My uncle back in the days speaks of his days in cricket, Napoleon Sanford, and the oppression they faced coming out of the Kalinago territory. So the talent has always been there from the inception of the Kalinago race. As actually, we were always understanding of nature, and once you have that deep understanding of nature, anything else will flow with that, including sports. So we have made great strides in sports, athletics, football, a number of players now on the various clubs in the football league, volleyball. We have made our part in archery, and you just name it. So the Kalinago people have been blessed with a lot of the talent, but the facilities are not forthcoming. Whether it's intentional or not, or we will deal with that for sure. Because you see a pattern in government, and I will come to that as it even relates to the Kalinago Act. There is a fear. There is a in my own view, I believe there is an inherent, kind of hidden fear of the rise of the Kalinago people that is embedded in the Constitution and in the Kalinago Act. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that the Europeans always feared that the Kalinago people would rise back and stop them in the game. And when the colonizers left, those who inherited the plantation still carry along that fear. And the act is constructed in such a way that it keeps us as Kalinago people at bay, even while we make strides in all the areas that I outlined earlier on, in entertainment, even in politics. We have a first president who is ceremonial, doesn't say much on behalf of the Kalinago people by design, which is kind of shameful, but still that is the reality of the day. Their own prestige and personal gain and wealth and status is way more significant than the plight and the struggles of the Kalinago people. We see that, but we have made, on the record, we have made strides politically because we have the first female president of Dominica. That's a huge accomplishment for a Kalinago person. As to whether that means much on the ground and in the lives of the people, we do not see that. We have the first female chief, again, that is political strides, but we see the barriers set for her in accomplishing her mandate as the Kalinago chief. The prime minister would come into the reservation after a disaster and would not have the respect to show courtesy to the Kalinago chief. So these are the realities of the strides. So while we have made strides and we have fared out well in face of the challenges between 1978 and now, it has always been, made with also significant challenges. We still live in a lot of poverty. The poverty assessment report from the Caribbean Development Bank of 2008 and 2009 placed us at 48% poverty in comparison to the 28% of the national figure. And I believe it has gotten worse over the years, because post 2000, 1995-2000, when we had the banana industry and some agriculture production, of which the Kalinago people depend heavily upon, that has shrinked and shrink badly. So one would expect that the poverty level has risen quite tremendously in the Kalinago territory. And the government has taken advantage of that and provided houses that they are given to the people. Create the Kalinago territory into a concrete jungle, moving just totally away from the traditional methods of building and the aesthetics of those architectural Kalinago designs, which have fared well during disasters and storms. And they have dumped a whole set of concrete on the territory. And we saw the result of that in the last passage of the rain. Not a bad thing to give people homes, but to totally disregard their tradition and their cultural values is neither here nor there. And we talk about the poverty. We can go into a lot of detail, as I told Mr. G, that to go into all the analysis of the causation of poverty is another big topic, but I will just touch on a few here. This poverty can be broken down into the whole idea of the structural part of the territory. The Kalinago territory was last to receive electricity in the entirety of Dominica, 1985. Between 1980 and 1985, under the leadership of Ann Timothy, we got electricity. We were the last to receive internet in the entirety of Dominica, 2015, 2020. We were the last to receive water, pipe-borne water, 1995, 2000, under Francois Barre and the United Workers' Party. We were the last to receive roads. The main road in the Kalinago territory was built in 1975, between 70 and 75. And the access road we had before that was traditional to the territory was totally abandoned and never seek to be maintained. So we have one main road going through the Kalinago territory, and all other roads, the secondary roads, are voluntary, self-help, save the children. Mr. Christian will talk a little bit about that. The authorities of the day haven't seen it fit to create a road network in the Kalinago territory, which would assist in agriculture, in asset development, and wealth building. They haven't done that. There's a historical cause to the poverty. We have been marginalized from the inception of the Europeans, and we're still marginalized because we're given most of the rugged land on the island. We are given less land with less opportunity to do agriculture, which is what our survival depends on, etc. And you talk about the environmental aspect to it. We try to preserve our environment and we fight for the bunch, but people push us aside like the third cousin, as you rightly said. No respect, no regard for prior consent and engagement. We have the institutional causes. Our land is held in commune. We cannot take it to the bank as collateral, but none of the administrations for the last 48 years and beyond, before that, has come up with a model that could help us overcome those cultural obstacles. And even when we have ideas of models that we can implement, they won't listen to us unless it fits their political narrative. And if it comes from somebody who will support their political line, they won't listen. They won't engage you. They will ostracize you and firebomb your house if you speak a little too loud. So these are some of the causes, and then we have some of the challenges. We still have land issues. Our population has grown from 400 in 1903 to about 2,600 now, but the land space remains the same. And then again, as I just mentioned earlier, it's under threat, and nobody is looking to extend our land space. the idea of climate vulnerability. You spoke about Debonche and the river, but the river is just one aspect of the benefits to the Kalinago territory. When we look at the forests and the carbon credits and all that stuff, and the destruction of that heartland of our existence is more than just the river. It's about life. It's about oxygen. It's about, and we have to bear the brunt of that, not being able to save. There's no heritage fund, as you said. There's nothing set aside for us to preserve the Kalinago race to start with, far less for the livelihood of the Kalinago people. We have to fend on our own. Self-determination. The curriculum of the education system is a continuation of the colonial education system. We are not given any chance to integrate any of our history, any of our learning, any of our self-worth and self-identity into any part of the curriculum without having to go to the Ministry of Education. And if they think that will empower us, they'll cut it down. So it has to take a revolution from the grassroots to enable us to start implementing in the heads and the minds of our people to build back their identity and their true worth and culture and dignity. That is another revolution in the happening. Maybe not violently, but we have to find strategies and ways to do that. And when, as you rightly said, some of our leaders will sell out to the political masters and to the greed, the culture of greed that has been allowed to grow within the governance of the country, they sell out the people. They will not put those agendas forward, either in parliament or through motions or through debates or through legislation. They're educated, yes. They went to university, yes. They hold degrees, yes. But when come to the true dignity and identity and the consciousness of the people, that is gone. That is placed on the altar of greed and wealth and political patronage. And those of us who are willing to fight that struggle are ostracized and made and pushed aside and not given any opportunity, because money is all. Money can buy those thinking. And it's sad.
So Claudius, why don't we put a pause here, and you can come back a little bit later and continue, because we have so much to talk about on this subject. So let me just go over to Crispin Gregoire now. Crispin, you've done a lot of work. You've been associated with the Kalinago territory for quite some time. As Claudius mentioned, you've always saved the children. You worked there, you lived there for quite a while. In your remarks, your opening remarks, among other things that you have in mind to talk about, could you sort of deal with this question? What impact did the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples of 2007, the UN General Assembly High-Level Meeting on Indigenous Peoples, also known as the World Conference on Indigenous Peoples of 2014, and the annual UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Peoples, what impact have these had on the Kalinago people of Dominica? And now with the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples reaching its 20 years of existence in 2027, is it time that the CARIB Act, the legislation governing indigenous people of Dominica, is it time that it be revised and aligned with the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and the outcome document of the World Conference on Indigenous Peoples, in view, as I said earlier, of the alleged mining and environmental degradation now affecting the communities? So your thoughts, Crispin?
Yes, good evening again, Mr. G. It's one of those, speaking about the Kalinago peoples is one of the passionate areas that I like to talk about. I have been on a journey since I left graduate school in 1982. And that journey eventually took me to work with the Kalinago peoples in 1984. And you're right, I worked there for 5 years. I didn't live in the territory because the territory was only part of a larger program that I managed, or the ROSO. And it was interesting times. We're talking about the mid-1980s. Save the Children came to Dominica That's the American Save the Children, because the Canadian Save the Children had been here. There was the British Save the Children, replaced by the Canadian Save the Children, and they were separate from us. We were not linked to them except through an alliance of all the Save the Children of the world. And Mr. G, at that time, I was a young Turk. I was 27 years old. I come back home. I never went to university to stay in the US. I went to come back, and I did. And I did that for 5 years. And you know, it didn't end up well, because I end up in controversy with the government about the Kalinagos. I inherited a program which was started by a man from New Zealand. His name was Alan Brown, and a very committed individual to the aspirations of the Kalinago people. And he was doing development work, helping to do self-help work in the villages that we worked in, mostly the Kalinago villages, the 7 hamlets, but also working in Marigot, and a little bit of work in Wesley. And his program had a strong focus on the cultural recuperation of the Kalinago peoples. And I found that to be a very important foundation to work with when I came. So I continued that focus of the cultural recuperation. But I must say that something had happened before I came, and even before Mr. Brown came, and that was the Kalinago leaders, the emerging Kalinago leaders who were in their late teens, early 20s. They had begun to be aware that there was a global indigenous movement building in the world. They were very clear on that. And they wanted to be connected to that global indigenous revival that was happening worldwide. And that took a period of about 30 years, from the 1980s up to 2007, when the UN Declaration was passed by the UN. While working with the Kalinagos at 5 years, the government decided that they would not renew our agreement working in Dominica and working mainly with the Kalinagos. And the Kalinago people, it was a tremendous loss for them, because the first organization that would really be seen as helping them in terms of development work and helping to put infrastructure in the Kalinago territory was cut off. I mean, the government said, we don't want you doing any more community work. So I said, okay. And you know, Mr. Sanford mentioned at the time the Honorable Ann Timothy, who was representing the Salibia constituency, and she came from the Freedom Party, and her party was in government. And they turned around and said that Save the Children is communist, and that Crispin Gregoire is a communist. And what he's trying to do is instilling bad ideas in the minds of the Kalinago people to make them think they are different. And that led to resentment. And Mr. G, one of the things that really struck me, and let me underscore that here tonight, I would say that the majority Dominica population have never really interacted with the Kalinago people. Maybe they meet them at the market and they say hello and so on. They're selling their baskets or whatever they're trading. But the average Dominican doesn't know the Kalinago people and have no interest in, well, there was no much interest back in 1984 in them. And here's what I went through. When the Kalinago Council tried to disobey the act, that act we talked about, of 1978, the Carib Act. The Carib Act has institutionalized in a way the Carib Council, but there's one thing in that act that the Kalinago leadership never liked and will never like up to this day. And that is, yes, the council has the legal mandate to manage and govern the territory, the Kalinago territory. But there are clauses in that act that limits the power of the chief and the council, to the extent that if somebody were to violate the law and say they're going to go into Kalinago lands and squat, you know that the Kalinago Council under the Act does not have the power to expel such people who would violate the boundaries of the territory. And the council tried to take action by doing just that, to disregard the act and say, look, there were some people living there on the basis of having a girlfriend in the territory, and they're growing marijuana, so we're going to serve notice on them to leave. And when they did that, that brought down the hammer of Miss Charles. And Miss Charles, they blame Save the Children for that. They said Save the Children was behind that. We had no involvement. I must say, though, that one or two of our staff may have been involved in this, but the leadership of the Save the Children office was never involved in this. And we would never tell the council to take such action because it would be illegal under the act. But the council, as I said, was out to disregard the act and show their displeasure with the way the act was written. So that is one of the things. It comes back to your question, Mr. G, whether this act is obsolete. The act is obsolete. We're talking about an act that is now almost 50 years in existence. And there have been troubles, there have been problems. I mean, what happened, unfortunately, to the Kalinago people, the loss from Save the Children. When we were shut down, I lost $3 million that I couldn't spend. Now, that should have gone to the Kalinago peoples, most of it. At that time, Ms. Charles had agreed for me to expand the program into Grand Bay, and that's where I also ran into problems, because as soon as she said yes for me to go to work in Grand Bay, to help with the Geneva uprising, post-Geneva uprising, because nothing had been done there, and she said, by all means, Crispin, go to Grand Bay and contribute to your people. And I went there, and but the following year, something happened. The late Pierre Charles was first elected in 1985. And I was summoned to a cabinet meeting and told, no longer can you work in Grand Bay. Just give relief to children. We don't want you doing any more community work. That was it. And Save the Children closed. I left the country and I went to Africa to work. But as fate has it, something happened again in my life that brought me back to the indigenous peoples. This time on a global level. One, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People that you mentioned, Mr. G, which is the governing framework and body of international law that governs how the member states of the world, how they relate to indigenous people. Just to give you a sense, on a global level, indigenous people are estimated to number about 470 million people worldwide, right? In some 90 countries, of which Dominica is one of them, one of the 90. And they represent, that population I just mentioned, represents 6.2% of the world population, right? Only 6.2%. That is what has happened to them. They have been decimated over centuries by the colonial powers, wiped out in certain places. And that is the number left. Only 6.2% of the world population. When their percentage was much larger than that. And of course, these people, these indigenous people, which they number about 5,000 different indigenous cultures around the world, they account for most of the cultural diversity in the world today. And Mr. G, further, so when I was the ambassador of Dominica to the UN, this UN declaration came up. And I was probably the ambassador who was most supportive of the indigenous people worldwide. And later on, I am now asked by the UN to organize the first World Conference on Indigenous Peoples. A Dominican from a small island of less than 100,000 people, to organize that conference, that high-level meeting of the UN General Assembly. And, you know, I always reflected over that time of my start with the Kalinago people and what I had learned from them. Mr. G, I must say, right, the thing that was most hurtful for me about the Kalinago people is the lack of a direct consultation with them leading up to independence. No consultation at all. I was told by WOW, Waterfront and Allied Workers Union, that the then chief, Mr. Faustulus Frederick, came to their office while the delegation was in London negotiating with the British. And he was asking, how do we make input? How do we, the Carib people at the time, we didn't know the name Kalinago at that point. We knew that name, but that was not being used officially. How do we convey our contribution to this? What's the future of the 3,700 acres of land that is the territory? Will it continue? What are the conditions? So this actually led to a debate in the British Parliament. And this one member of Parliament is asking the Foreign Office these questions. What about the future of the Kalinago peoples? And that is well documented in the UK Hansards for the House of Commons of United Kingdom. So, and it was that afterthought. Then, when it was raised in England, then the authorities in Dominica said, oh, wait a minute, there's something missing. We didn't complete our work properly. The Kalinagos, we have to help, we have to do something quick. And that's how the Carib Act came to be passed. I believe that that act was passed maybe months before the actual attainment of independence, but it's after independence that it really takes effect. Okay. Now, with the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, I must say, Mr. G, that's the toughest task I have ever done in my whole life. I've done many things, but to be in the middle of the indigenous people and the countries that oppressed them and the other countries that later on got their independence, to be sitting in a room, to be the facilitator of a discussion of what will be the rights that these countries of the UN, the 193 countries, will respect the indigenous people of the world under a framework. And that is the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And that has become the new body of international law that governs how countries are required under law to respect the indigenous peoples of the world. And that includes the indigenous people of Dominica. Let me say about the indigenous people of Dominica. You know, at the beginning of the last century, and Claudius rightfully mentioned that there were about 400 Kalinagos in 1903. But if we start in 1900, that census figure was showing about 263 or so Kalinagos, maybe about closer to 300, right? So we had this concern as to whether they would have survived as a tribe in the 20th century. We didn't even think they would make it to the 21st century. But here's what happened. In that century of the 20th century, their numbers grew because their birth rate was twice the national birth rate. So whereas the natural increase, the birth rate in Dominica was in the 70s and 80s was about 1.6%. The Kalinago's birth rate was twice that. So that kept their numbers growing to the extent that today they are just under 4,000, and they're here in the 21st century. Here we have the first quarter of this 21st century. They're here, and they're going to be here. Of course, there has been a much admixture with the black population, the African Dominican black population. But what I say, and I say that to the Kalinagos, and I say that to the non-Kalinagos, and that is, for the majority, the absolute majority of Dominicans, Kalinago blood flows through your veins. Don't ever forget that. And therefore, from the Kalinago side, the Kalinago people must also see that there is a wider family, a wider Kalinago family outside the territory. I mean, when you think of villages like Saint-Sauveur, Good Hope, Petite Soufrière, Petite Savane, Font-Saint-Jean, Bagatelle, the Petite Savane people, I probably mentioned Petite Savane. So you have villages outside Dominica, very distinctly Kalinago. And so the Kalinago people have to see themselves not just limited to the Carib territory or the Kalinago territory, but their heritage is across Dominica. So that's one. The other thing I need to underscore, very, very important, and it's my colleagues have alluded to that, both Mr. Sanford and Dr. Andre. Not teaching Kalinago history in the school is one of the biggest setbacks that we've had in the last 50 years. Because our people know nothing about these people. These people have achieved so much. The fact that they could make sure that Dominica was a neutral country respected by the British, Spanish, and the French, the Kalinagos of Dominica, they kept the Europeans out. They kept Dominica safe for more than a century after the colonization. And today, they are the guardians of the traditional knowledge of Dominica. Imagine the trees on Dominica. Do you know that Dominica is the only island that has that kind of forest that we have? Why? Because the Kalinago people made several, in the time when Dominica was under Kalinago rule, we're talking about throughout the 1600s, almost into the late 1700s, because we were not colonized formally until 1763. So the Kalinagos kept the Europeans out and made Dominica safe. And they went to the Amazon, where they came from, and brought back all kinds of plants, so that the plant life in Dominica is largely due to the Kalinago people. And more than that, the traditional knowledge about our medicine, our craft, look at the baskets they've been making for more than 500 years. You go to Brazil, you see the same baskets in Brazil. You go to Suriname, you see the same baskets in Suriname. So, and the things that I learned from the Kalinago people, don't speak about food, don't speak about cassava, I don't speak about how they made alcohol, don't speak about their surroundings. The one thing that's most striking to me when I went to the Kalinago territory in 1984, because I had never been there before, was how every home is so beautifully surrounded by flowers. You go to the Kalinago territory, you go to a Kalinago person's home, and it's a joy to see the plant life around their houses. So, Mr. G, I think that the UN Declaration has helped the Kalinago people to connect to the global indigenous movement that I'm talking about. And having been in the middle of organizing this global meeting of indigenous people from all over the world, and unfortunately, as Dr. Andre said and Mr. Sanford said, do you know that the Dominican government did not facilitate the Kalinago people to participate in the World Conference? I am the organizer of this conference. I asked every one of the 93 countries where there are indigenous people to make sure that their delegations are coming to New York for the World Conference. And do you know who was the only representative for Dominica at the World Conference? It was the ambassador then. He's now the foreign minister, Vince Henderson. The man has 6 seats in the General Assembly to bring 5 other Kalinagos. He's the only one sitting there. No Kalinagos with him. It was really not so pleasant for me to know that the people that I worked with, the Kalinago people, were not represented at the conference. Not because they didn't want to come, because their government did not facilitate them coming. You know? So that's now going forward.
No, Crispin, you make that brief because I want to go over to Lambi to see if you want to take some calls, so you can kind of try to wrap up this particular segment of your contribution.
The numbers are as follow: 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097, 616-4257, all local numbers, and the international or overseas number 305-432-9624. Let me run those numbers one more time. 449-3095-9697, 616-4257, 305-432-9624. We already have a caller on the line, so let's take that caller.
Hello.
Go ahead, please, caller.
Yeah. Good evening, Lambi. Good evening to the panel. I have a question for Mr. Crispin Gregoire. I'd like to ask him if he believes that, based on the laws that have been passed by the UN, that this present government is breaking the law by the mines that they are establishing adjacent to and above, so to speak, where the Kalinago people reside. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. For
one second, Crispin. Let me take another call.
Yes, there's another caller on there. Caller, please go ahead.
In the interest of time, gentlemen, blessings to you all, and thanks for the reasoning. I try to listen and not call at times. I'm afraid of Dr. Andre. He's there now?
Yes, he's there. He's right there.
Dr. Andre, blessings to you, Claudius, and everybody. Just quickly, gentlemen. Claudius, can you tell me, it is a housing war or housing revolution in the Kalinago territory? The terms and conditions are as stringent as the other parts of Dominica where they have houses and you have a politician saying the houses are 100% government owned, while under every other administration where there was certificate of titles issued and people pay for their houses and get it, you could take your note. Kalinagos and African people, what they call black people in Dominica, I say African people. The oppression we faced collectively during colonialization and all those colonial masters and all of that, and then they left and leave their children, the mulattoes and all of that. Then we all face the same oppression from the mulattoes. And then you have the African, Caribbean people, what they call black people in Dominica, took over and administering the same oppression on the Kalinago to a lesser magnitude. maybe it will not be will not as brutal, but it's the same oppression. So you see, Claudius was a bit quite hesitant when he talked about correlation or causation or one of them. But it is the correlation and the causation, or the causation is through the correlation based on our history together as a people on this little piece of rock. And it is shameful in preservation of the Kalinago people. I think once Claudius made a statement, and a lot of people took offense. And I'm checking in the preservation of a people, how inconsiderate for people to want it to think, well, what Claudius said, it was something, they talk about racist and all, we are strange. But just a few things. Claudius, about the Kalinago president, after the disaster, have she ever visited the Kalinago territory? Is she been instructed not to go there because she might, overshadow somebody's spotlight? That is another thing I want to talk about. And the final thing, that $10 million from Chavez, bless his soul wherever he may be, given to the government of Dominica on the behalf of the Kalinago people, where is that money? What that money have done for the Kalinago people? And I know some of our history together, fighting the oppressors, all the forests and the caves and the rocks and the mountains, and all of a sudden we feel, we're suffering from amnesia. We forget our history, and the Kalinago people need to be marginalized and be a second class in a place where they originated. I want to say glory to the Kalinago people. Claudius, I don't know if you can quickly just touch on what I asked. And let me give thanks to why is his name? Crispin. I give thanks to you, Crispin, for working with the Kalinago people. The oppression, it is shameful and embarrassing to see we replace our oppressors that oppressed us together or collectively. Thank you.
Yes, well, thanks a lot for those two calls here. But first of all, Crispin, I think the first caller asked you to answer a question, and then I'll go to very briefly, and then go to Claudius.
Yeah. Well, the response to that question, very good question. As I said in my presentation, there's a whole body of international law that emerged with the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, and it was further buttressed by the what we call the outcome document. That's the document that came out of the World Conference on Indigenous Peoples that was negotiated between the states and the indigenous peoples of the world. Now, one of the core principles in that whole regime of law governing indigenous peoples and how countries relate to them is the principle of free, the word free, followed by a comma, followed by the word prior, Prior, free, prior, and informed consent. Free, prior, and informed consent. We use the acronym in this indigenous slang discourse. It's called FPIC, FPIC, free, prior, and informed consent. Clearly, the people who are making policy for the Kalinago people, they haven't read that. Because I heard the Minister of Kalinago Affairs, who, by the way, is the parliamentary representative representing the Kalinago people, Honorable Cozier Frederick, in an utterance he made recently on his Facebook page. I would really like him to print that on the Ministry of Kalinago Affairs page, or put out a statement on that, because in his personal capacity as Facebook, I'm not saying that's the official line, but he said something that was really unconscionable for an indigenous person to say, and for somebody at his level. And that is that in times of disaster, free, prior, and informed consent is not relevant. Think about that. This is a core principle from the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And when Chief Annette Sanford, raised in their press statement their disagreement of how the unconscionable behavior of the Prime Minister towards the chief after a disaster, where no consultation, none. They don't even understand that the international law dictates that they're supposed to consult. And the Prime Minister said he went to the territory 3 times. He never told people that his intelligence officers told him that the home of the chief had been destroyed and that he should sympathize with her. First of all, she and her family. She has small children. She had to relocate. And no consultation, and not even an invitation to a meeting, a formal letter conveying an invitation to a meeting. Just, they're putting the cat before the horse with the Kalinago people. That has been what has been going on for a long time, and it must end.
Okay.
And what I think will happen on this Debauche problem, it's directly affecting the Kalinago people, and the free, prior, and informed consent principle applies there as well, that they should have been told the implications to expect that there could be a disaster with the Pigwa River, which is affecting the Kalinago people. So where is the consultation? So there was no consultation with Debauche, and the fact that it's negatively impacting the Kalinago people. And then when this recent disaster happened, look at the behavior. Look at the behavior of both the Prime Minister and the Minister responsible for Kalinago affairs. So I'm saying that they need to go and read the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, and particularly the Minister. But I'm not having the Prime Minister off the hook, you know. His behavior was despicable, and I have to say that. Thank you.
All right, Crispin. Claudius, let me go over to you very quickly. I mean, just before that, let's take a call from Lambie, and then I want to go over to Dr. Andre afterwards. Lambie, go ahead.
Yes, caller, please go ahead as quickly as you can.
The caller is not there. All right, so Claudius, maybe the caller will call back. Claudius, your take on that question that the caller put before you?
Yeah, so he asked about the housing revolution or is a housing war, and that is a very interesting question in light of what is going on with the housing developments in the Kalinago territory. We had an incident where a lady was given a house and she passed away, and she willed it to her son, and the government came in and took over the house and gave it to somebody else without the consent or the consultation of the Carib Council or the Kalinago Council and Chief. And according to the Act, the Kalinago Act of 1978, the Kalinago Chief and Council are the bearers of the land. They secure the land, and they have full authority over the land. So in that case, I can see where Blessing's asking whether it's a revolution or a war, because that is a legal battle right there. I believe somebody didn't do the right thing, and there is need for legal redress on that particular matter. So the way it is in the Kalinago territory, the land belongs to the people, and it is willed on to your descendants, and they inherit the land, and they can sell it to somebody within the territory or will it onto their own children. But for the government to come in and just hijack someone's property on the Kalinago territory and give it to somebody else for political patronage is kind of worrying, and it's really infringing on conflict. And I believe the most efficient way, or I would say the most peaceful way to address that would be to take the matter to court, and I believe it is in the jurisdiction of the council and chief to do that. They will choose whether they do that or not, but that I think has some legal redress to it.
Yeah.
The president visit, of course, the president live on the Kalinago territory, and she visit the Kalinago territory. As to whether her visit had any impact as to helping or bringing some relief to the people, I haven't heard her. I haven't heard any statement from her in that regard. I'm not saying she did not do it. I just haven't heard it. But I know she has visited her home. She lives on the territory, so she would have visited the Kalinago territory. As it relates to the Venezuelan US $10 million, I don't think that is anywhere here there. That was the beginning of the end of the beginning of the growth of corruption and misappropriations of funds in Dominica. Like, we're talking about $5 billion in passport sales. Where's that money? Where is it? So the $10 million US that they took from us, they gave us a school and a few homes, but it was used for their campaign in 2009. And we know that, and we saw it. We asked about it, and it has never been repaid. I believe a UWP government will definitely reinstate that money to the Kalinago people for its purposes. I believe that is something, as part of the current executive of the party, when we get into government, there's something that we have to consider. Because the people need those resources. It was given for a particular purpose. And the government of the day, the Roosevelt Skerrit and his gang, took it away. So the people will still be needing the money. That is how I will say on this.
Okay.
On these two questions.
Excellent. Dr. Andre, you meant a little earlier on, you mentioned this question about this having these properties, but giving people to live in a zone, but not giving them a title. And you see what the example that Claudia just gave of a property being taken away from a deceased person's kid and given to somebody else. So this really, I mean, it really confirms the statement that you were making on this. And then any other thoughts that you already have on this topic tonight, you can share with us now.
Well, again, what Claudius has said just echoes what I've said. But if you speak to Lazarus, ask him whatever happens to the home Monster B, I can't remember his formal name, used to live, within 3 hours of his death. One of the acolytes of the political directorate took the key of the home and give it to his prime minister, or his designate, one of the two. In fact, his brother was on your radio station, Mr. G. Don't ask me what Monster B's formal name was. I should know it because he was in the grammar school, although ahead of me. But the keys to the home were unceremoniously taken away from the brother to give to these folk, to give it to their next sycophant. And that is why this whole business about development and revolution is pure nonsense. That is exactly what it is. Pure, unadulterated nonsense. Remember that famous or infamous statement of the poor wretch in La Plaine who was beaten by allegedly a man of the cloth, or is it a born-again pagan? I'm not sure. And he said, "Beat me, please, because I would have gotten my home before." That is what you've reduced the Dominican citizen to. Begging for every depravity, for every indignity, so you can get a home. In other words, you can buy into your dependency. You are contributing to your dependency. You are contributing to your economic enslavement, really, because you will have to act at every whim and fancy of the political directorate as a means of getting a home. As I said, historically, acquiring or earning or building a home has been the high point of economic dependency, not just for Dominicans, but for Caribbean people all over. But even that has been snatched away from the Dominican people. The ability to become independent, as I said, to add, like so many owners did in Bath Estate, for example, and other development areas, add a little concrete section to the home, have their child or children inherit it and build on it and use it as collateral, leverage the equity in that home to launch businesses, to send their children to school. That has been totally severed from the future of these so-called homeowners. And you call that a revolution? Huh? Are you kidding me? This is a joke. This is an assault on the economic independence of Dominicans who are striving to become independent. But they've been deprived of that very essence of citizenship in their own country. While you have foreigners receiving what, 9.5 or $4 million in terms of tax breaks. You have some foreigners being able to import goods and all they have to say is, I know speak English. Well, they say that in whatever language they speak. You know, you relegate your own folk to second-class status in their own community and the Kalinago territory, in my view, to the third or fourth-class status. No, the revolution should be in the consciousness of the people. That's where it should be. Not in these trinkets. Those who are fortunate, who live in apartment buildings, they have to contend with sewage, defective sewage, that has a deleterious effect on their own health. But they can't say anything loud. They can't complain about it because they'll be out of the door. And that is the revolution these folk are talking about. It is a bastardization of the word. Dominicans deserve better. Thank you.
Dr. Andre, while you're at it, let's deal with this thing here. I mean, the Kalinago Council is a tribal government. What should the central government approach to working in this local government authority be that is different from a village council? Now, I'll put the same question to Crispin.
And we know why this is happening. It's no secret. It's not rocket science. Because Annette Sanford doesn't sing the same tune as some of the acolytes or sycophants of the government. It's very simple. There's no rocket science. That's why she's being treated in this way. The Kalinago people are being punished for choosing someone who is a true representative of their aspirations and their hopes and their sense of dignity and integrity. They are being punished. That is the only reason why this nonsense is happening. Huh? Claudius is probably right that pursuant to the legislation, it could be challenged the fact that the government has superseded or encroached on the authority of the council with respect to issues involving housing and so on. But not much or not enough of these things are being challenged. That's the problem, you know? And the question is, who will rise to give voice to the people, the Kalinago folk? Because they cannot remain in a state of perpetual dependency. They cannot do so. They cannot remain in a state of vulnerability where every aspiring politician believes that all that they have to buy is a gallon of Bushram or Lapset or Zaid or whatever other kind of rum, I don't know. You know, and to acquire the votes of these folk. That is enslavement. It's not empowerment. And they have to respond to the real leaders among their own people who will work to give them or let them get the place they deserve to have in the community. Let's face it, historically for decades, the folk have contended with those kinds of prejudices. There's no doubt. We can try to deny it left, right, and center. I grew up in Portsmouth. I spent time in Vekas. I know I was exposed to some of that negativism from the time I was young. As simple as that. In one of his speeches in Parliament, Edward Oliver LeBlanc in the late 60s, talk about precisely that politicians should stop mamagaying or taking advantage of the Kalinago folk by giving them a few gills of rum. You know? Fortunately, that has dissipated to some degree because, again, as I said, you have a rise of not a so-called intellectual class, but persons who become educated and persons who are offering leadership, persons who are enlightened. But it's not every educated person who can offer hope to the territory. Huh? What is the role of Kozia in all this thing, in all this debauch, in that storm? Didn't our president go to China and suggest what is wrong with 3,500 Chinese come and take over the place? Nothing wrong. So it's not just a matter of tokenism that causes change. Persons who have the vision and commitment and moral integrity to stand to call a spade a spade. That is what is needed in the territory. Unfortunately, there are folk in the territory who have manifested those kinds of leadership qualities, and I hope that their voices can rise to a crescendo and break that cycle of dependency and poverty and impoverishment and disrespect, which is the legacy of colonialism and the continuing legacy of our political directorate in Dominica in 2026. They deserve it more than many of us, quite frankly.
Yes, thanks a lot, Dr. Andre. No, I have the same question for you, Claudius. On the question is the Kalinago Council is a tribal government, and what should be the central government's approach to working with this local government authority, which is different from a village council? And of course, you've illustrated some of that in some of these comments you made earlier in terms of the disrespect and the disregard of the Kalinago Council in all of the government's operations. Your thoughts?
Well, as I said earlier, the way the Kalinago Act was written, it was written in such a way to keep the Kalinago people in check. And Crispin alluded to that earlier, that has to change, because the 1978 context of the existence of the Kalinago territory has changed. The education system has empowered a lot of people. The young people are more enlightened with what is going around the world with the internet and information technology. And there are lawyers who have gone and study and interpret law. So that context of where a man leave high school could hardly read well, he went to school 3 days they miss a week because he didn't get a truck to go down in the morning. That has gone. So the enlightenment has taken place, and as such, the legal challenge of the constitution has to be addressed. We have to change that constitution. And the current system where you have the government have beef with the current chief because of the political differences of opinion, not necessarily is true, but it's perceived, because as the chief, you ought to be neutral, and it has demonstrated her ability to try to walk that path in putting the needs of the Kalinago people first, and advocating in a fair sense for the respect and the dignity of the people and their heritage to preserve, and a right for them to determine their own destiny. And that is what is driving that. But the current government doesn't want that, because, as Brother Andre rightly said, they want a dependent Kalinago territory where they can manipulate for their political advantage. But the scenario is changing with the overwhelming support of victory of Annette, 700 votes to 200 votes. That's a massive lead. So the people are becoming in tune to that. Hey, we cannot really grow wealth by being dependent on the government for everything. I mean, these people pass at nights, Mr. G, and distribute bags of groceries. That is the rationing of the Kalinago. When we used to be like, we used to actually bring bananas down to Roseau and leave it on the streets for people to go at their homes. And now we have politicians coming at nights, 12 o'clock, with a little rice and flour, with a little lentils and a tin of milk to drop in homes. I mean, how worse can it get? You understand? And Crispin talk about the flowers in the homes. When you went to a Kalinago home, you had animals, you had the goats in the backyard, you had the fowls, you had the eggs coming out from the little bushes, and you had the fruits and all the yampe and you had a little paradise in every family. They destroyed that and they put concrete against concrete 2 feet apart, where people fighting each other for a little row of flowers now in the Kalinago territory. Totally disseminate the culture and the actual survival of the Kalinago territory. And we, as in the Kalinago territory and the current council, my wife, who will happen to be in that position, is beginning to change this around, because we believe the change has to be grassroots. And it is a strong advocate for grassroots movement, and the cultural regeneration of the people has to start from the school system. And we have to start from the homes and empowering the homes. And it's just distasteful that the current government would not allow the respect that is and the dignity that the Kalinago chief and council deserve, and the right of the people who has supported them for the last 25 years to choose their own tribal government. And they would punish those very same people because they choose someone who is maybe going against their own chorus. It's just unfortunate. But I believe we'll survive and for the better. I believe it's a moment of revelation. I believe it's a moment of revelation that the people will see truly what the intentions of this government have always been, is to use the Kalinago people for what they can get out of them, and at the same time try to assimilate them into the wider Dominican culture, which the Eugenia Charles administration tried, Mr. Gregoire, and they failed. And this government will fail again. They have made progress in that way, but the people are opening their eyes to it, and there will be a change. And the people of the Kalinago territory will take their destiny into their hands. This is what I'm fighting for. This is what I'll keep fighting for. Blessing said earlier, I've been labeled a racist for that. I'm not a racist, but I just believe if you have the only, which is true, is a fact, that we have the only surviving indigenous community in the entire Caribbean. Just about 3,000. It is not even 3,000, because outward migration of young people for economic reasons has caused the population to deplete. Birth rates has dropped. There's a 4% drop in the birth rates between 2001 and 2011, and I believe it has gotten even worse now. So we cannot sit idle and let people just boorag these little remnants of the indigenous people and the contribution we have made to Dominica. Crispin talked about the preservation of the land and the trees. We have done more. The marine life. We used to use our little dugout canoe and go there and get our little fish and come back. Right now, the trawlers, and all the sediment from all this perceived development is mashing up the sea life, the marine life. And we are at the mercies of that, and our voices is not being heard in the Dayton scenario. Our voice is not being heard in other aspects of our development, and we're supposed to be spectators to what development should be. No, so I believe the fight is on. We will be victorious in the end. There's a spiritual reason why we still exist in 2026 as an indigenous tribe, and the destiny will be fulfilled. So we keep the fight going, and I am happy for the opportunity here now to even speak of those. No matter the label, at the end of the day, I have a moral obligation to stand for my people, and we will do it.
No, we will continue this discussion, as I said, in another 2 parts in the series, because there's so much more ground to be covered. But Crispin, your response to the same question I posed you about the Kalinago Council as a tribal government, and what should be the central government's approach to working with this local government is different from the regular village councils.
Yes. Well. First of all, here's the distinction between a village council and a tribal government. First of all, you have a tribe, a village. We don't have the distinction of villages being other tribes. We only have one tribe in Dominica. That's the Kalinago peoples. And the Kalinago peoples have, they have made some progress. I look at the caliber of people who are emerging now to be counselors, people who are trained. And let me go back to what really helped the Kalinagos a lot. Universal secondary education, which was brought about by the UWP government, meaning that all children in Dominica go to high school. That's a significant thing for the Kalinagos because they didn't have much access. A handful of them went to high school in my time. And the numbers, even when I came to work there in the 80s, were still small. We're talking about 15, 20 Kalinagos who were going to St. Andrews High School and the other high school in Marigot that Mr. What's his name? I can't remember, but there was a high school in Marigot.
The Foundation High School, Mr. Samuel Alavide.
Right, exactly. So those 2 schools, and we didn't have a high school in Casabros. So now the Kalinagos have 2 high schools they can go to, Casabros and the Northeastern Secondary School. That has made a fundamental difference with the Kalinago literacy levels and also their preparedness to continue their education beyond secondary school. So now you have a whole cadre of Kalinagos who are university trained and holding very important positions in our country, which in the 1980s I didn't see. There were a few Kalinago teachers, yes, but there was no Kalinago lawyer in 1984. There was no Kalinago surgeon, medical surgeon in 84. And also, let me say, put in a plug in there for the Cubans who trained some of the Kalinagos at university level at no cost to them. Also, the University of the West Indies setting up a special program for training Kalinago people. So what I'm saying, Mr. G, you have a new pool of people who are much more educated, who can make better contributions to the council, and that the council, as a tribal government, has a tribe to manage and govern and manage its resources. What are the resources of the Kalinago people? It's land, it's water, and it's forest. Those three things. Oh, let me add the ocean, because that is also part of their endowment. So they have these four things. And those four things, to me, are the pillars for their existence, of which the Kalinago Council has to govern. Now, Mr. G, one of the things that is really distressing to me is how the involvement of the ruling Dominica Labour Party into the local level of politics in the territory. Meddling, supporting candidates, running, giving them money for their campaign. And when they won, the chief gets a vehicle, the chief gets this and that. There is corruption in the council that when the audit report highlights it, the government does nothing. These are the things, these are the bad things that has happened to the Kalinago people, where corruption has become endemic, was endemic in the council before the current chief. What does the government say about that? That is the kind of thing that they want for the council, for there to be endemic corruption in the council. That cannot be tolerated, because in 1984, a Carib chief was actually sent to jail for mismanaging money of the Kalinago Council. Did that happen in with the last council? No, that was swept under the carpet, and it was much worse than what happened in 84 to the chief. So I'm saying that disrespect by central government must end. Development work is a joint venture between government, central government, and the people, and central government and the village councils and the Kalinago councils. It cannot be that central government thinks that they have so much power that they can do illegal things and do behavior that is unacceptable and not ethical. And that is what has governed the relationship with the council. So I'm saying that a new order must start. And here's what is important. Just like when I came to work with the Kalinago people in 1984, there was a movement of young Kalinagos who were aware and had aspirations to make the Kalinago people have a certain respect in their own country. That's what I don't see today, Mr. G. And I think the Kalinago people have to do some soul searching and return to that kind of militancy and preoccupation with their culture and the preservation of their culture, so that with all of these people who were educated at secondary level, the time for them to step up to the plate is now. And that is the next phase. We head into the 2030s. in 2030, it will be 100 years since the Marines, the British sent a warship into Celebia Bay, and that frightened the Kalinago peoples. And they have never forgotten that. That's why they have the Carib Day, Heritage Day in September 19th every year to commemorate what the British did to them. So it's not, 100 years is a long time, but it's not a time for us to forget the atrocities that was unleashed on the Kalinago people, going back from the time the white people made a deal with the Kalinago at Grand Bay, and they lost their country to these Europeans. And then when the Africans came, they schooled them to be hostile to the Kalinagos. Even though there was some cooperation between the Kalinagos and the runaway slaves, but remember, the runaway slaves were eventually all wiped out. So, Mr. G, I think the only advice I can give central government is to meet with the council and come up with a plan for where they take the Kalinago Council going forward towards 2030. Because I know that 2030 is going to be a year of celebration in the Kalinago territory. That entire year must be a year of celebration. And it is a kind of a revival that must happen in 2030 or even before 2030. So that the Kalinago people, the Kalinago youth, begin to do some soul searching to say, we need to take the Kalinago territory to another level. And we're not going to be kowtowing to nonsense from central governments that think because they have power, they can walk over the Kalinago people. No, the Kalinago people were there before any state of Dominica was established.
Yep, thanks a lot, Christian. Yes, and now, as Christian mentioned this, and Dr. Andre mention was made a moment ago about corruption in the past council. And let's not forget, I mean, that the two chiefs, Kalinago chiefs, were deposed. I think it was Jolly John and who was the other one? It was
Hilary Frederick.
Hilary Frederick.
Hilary Frederick, yeah.
Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that and just oppose that against what went on in the last Carib Council in terms of, whatever corruption there was, and absolutely no accounting for this.
Well, the simple truth is this. Not we, but those in authority, they have normalized corruption. There's no accountability. That is the only thing that explains what happened then and what is not happening now. As long as you belong to that inner circle, the circle which Alex Boyd Knight talked about, then you are exonerated, your sins are washed away. In fact, the surest way to get involved in activities which are unlawful or illegal is to associate yourself with the political directorate. That's the clear message that has been sent and that is being sent. So that is why we cannot underestimate, or we should never fail to commend those who stand up, because what they've done is to sacrifice a lust for personal wealth or bread or money or privilege or a SUV tinted, for God's sakes. And they have sacrificed that for the good of their community. And that is why we should never stop commending these folk. Because look at the anecdotal evidence. Look at the number of persons who overnight have been bought hook, line, and sinker by the political directorate. They come, they give all kinds of stupid reasons. God spoke to me. It doesn't say, God doesn't speak to me too then. God spoke to me. God spoke to us. Or no, I have considered it. Oh, I will support when support is due and not support when support is not due. Are you kidding me? This is a game. This business of trying to appear to be an honest arbiter, you are feathering your own nest. You just have to dig deep to find out what is the personal benefit that person is getting when they start talking that type of thing. I will praise where praise is necessary. When you have been given a little concession, as Shakespeare put it, but to betray in deepest consequence. You are given a little crumbs, but the purpose of those crumbs that you are receiving is to set you up for a bigger betrayal or to set up the country for a big betrayal. How can you talk about that in terms of statesmanship or principle? It's self-aggrandizement. You need some stern men and women who can stand up, irrespective of the cost, which is not to suggest that they should sacrifice their whole lives or that of their family. But being principled carries a price, and development, true development of a people carries a certain price. You don't sell your people down the road for a mess of pottage. You try to assist them to break the bonds of deprivation that they've experienced for decades. That's what you do. Success is measured that not by how much your pocket is filled, but the help you garner for people if you're in a position of authority. That is what real success is all about. And that is the theology that we must embrace, not the theology of selfishness. That has become patently lacking. When we talk about what happened to these two fellas in the council who had to face the wrath of the law compared to what transpires right now, there's nothing. There's talk about, oh, we will investigate that. Oh, jolly, we will investigate what happened at your store. Where's the investigation? An investigation. It's not happened, and it will not happen because the message is clear. If you join us, you can get away with anything that you want. At whose expense? Taxpayers. And is it just Labour Party taxpayers? No, it is all taxpayers, and therein lies the problem. The country is being held to ransom for the benefit of a few folks. And unless that cycle is not broken, we will remain in a state where, quite frankly, the vast majority of the persons cannot even earn a living wage to provide for themselves and their family. That cannot be good. It's not good for local businesses. It's not good for the banks. It's not good for the people in the construction industry. It's not good for the people in the trucking industry. It's not good because Dominicans, when they make a couple extra dollars, where do they spend it? In Grenada? In China? Huh? Is that where they spend it? You really think so? So we are being impoverished by our own, and that is the most unforgivable cut of all. Therein lies the problem.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Andrew. But Crispin, I think we can take your closing remarks now.
Well, I think, Mr. G, in view of the fact that we're going to have two other segments, I really can't give closing remarks, just to say that it was really an honor just to share tonight and speak about the reality of our Kalinago brethren and sistren. I think, you know, what a treasure we have in our own country of these people, the Kalinago, because I consider them a laboratory for resilience. You know, that whole talk about resilience after Hurricane Maria, we're talking about the first climate resilient country in the world. Well, we have a people here who have weathered hurricanes going back 500 years, and they know how to survive hurricanes. Their architecture was designed to deal with hurricanes so that the hurricane doesn't lift your roof. They knew the science of how to deal with that. But we see them not as important. I mean, we've had derogatory calypsos about the Kalinago people. In the 1960s, when I was going to high school, there was a very condescending calypso. I'm not even going to mention the name of it. But people were jumping up to that. And it portrayed the Kalinago people in a very bad light. And, you know, I can go on, but I'll tell you, had I not worked with the Kalinagos in the 1980s, maybe I wouldn't have found my calling. The Kalinago people put me on a pathway that changed my life forever. And it brought me to the highest level in the world dealing with the issues of indigenous people. So for that, I'm eternally grateful to them. And we have more to talk about in the next 2 segments, Mr. G. Good evening.
Very true, very true. Your closing remarks, Claudius, for tonight?
Yeah, as Crispin said, I would just want to thank you for at least listening to the suggestion to have a series and to bring in some other Kalinago people and their voices and their perspective on some of the issues. I'm very grateful for having the opportunity tonight to kind of introduce some of these topics and given the perspective from a Kalinago person himself on this program. So I really look forward to listening to the others and if me to participate as well and to bring greater awareness and different perspective to the Dominican population and as to the Kalinago people. I mean, we have been through a lot. The struggle still continues, but I believe there will be some moment of revelation and something positive out of all the struggle for the Kalinago people. I believe the true value of the contribution of the Kalinago people to Dominica will be understood sometime in the future. It is already beginning to take its root, and I believe we still have a lot more to contribute to the country that has not been given its fair share to blossom, and I believe that will happen as well. So I'm very optimistic for the future of the Kalinago territory and the people of the Kalinago territory. And thank you for the opportunity to start the conversation.
Great stuff. Dr. Andre, your final word?
Well, let me thank you for hosting this program this evening. It's a real pleasure to be in the company of someone like Crispin, who's worked hands-on in the territory, understand its problems and the aspirations of the Kalinago people, and obviously Mr. Sanford, who represents part of the emerging generation or genre of young leaders who, quite frankly, do not see education as just another aspect or component of the degree to which they are separated from their community, but something which enables them to be more fully integral to it. I think the Kalinago folks, the territory, they have to probably be mindful of what Martin Luther King called the fierce urgency of now. They have a long history of resilience, of struggle. They've overcome tremendous odds, quite frankly, but salvation, temporal or otherwise, and I speak of salvation in terms of their fate in Dominica, rest on their own shoulders with the assistance of other organizations and other Dominicans who believe that the strength of a community lies in its weakest link. So it's in Dominica's benefit to see that the Kalinago territory is uplifted in all these different ways, that they can march triumphantly, that they can be treated equally. They can be treated not as little curios on a table for tourists to come and admire and take pictures, but they can quite frankly generate and shape their own future. And I hope that we are, even if we don't know it, are on that path to full realization and actualization for the people of the Kalinago territory. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Andre, and you ended on a good note of self-actualization for the Kalinago people. And I just really want to thank all the folks who stayed with us on Facebook. And somebody on Facebook there is saying that they're endorsing part 2 of this program to elucidate a lot more about the Kalinago way of life and really And to probably at the end of it all, we'll look at some ideas as to the way forward for the Kalinago people. So thank you so much for staying with us on YouTube and Facebook. Thank you so much for on the radio, on the internet, in your vehicles, on your phones. And thank you, Dr. Andre. Thank you, Crispin. Thank you, Claudius. Thank you, Lambi. Thank you, Kevin, sticking with us tonight. And just let me say just a very pleasant good night to everybody. Talk to you again soon.
Thank you, folks. Nice
Good
meeting you.
night to everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Great work.
Bye.
Take care.
All right.
Good night. Good night, guys. Thank you.
Okay.
The Global View on Q, the big station. Insights into where the people of Dominica and the Caribbean came from. Understanding our past. Embracing our present. Charting the way forward into our future. Together, eliminating poverty. Embracing justice, peace, and togetherness. The Global View on Q. Networking Dominica with the rest of the world. The experts are in the house. From Dominica, Canada, the Caribbean, the United States, Europe, Asia, and the rest of the world. Engaging all Dominicans at home and abroad on our agriculture, our economy, our foreign relations, our justice system, our governance, our international competitiveness, our education, our world-class festivals and entertainment, sports, politics, regional cooperation, and much more. Globally positioning Dominica within the Caribbean. Join the conversation on the Global View on Q. Tune in, call us, have your say. The Global View on Q. Only on Q95, the big station. The
Looking out my window, and I'm a thinking of tomorrow, and I'm a wondering what the future will be. Thinking of the children who are the victims of oppression, eaten down by what's and eaten up by starvation.